Welcome everybody to Columbus Elementary School, the best little school in CPS that not many people know about. I'm Wendy Alexi, the principal of this awesome little gem in the Ukrainian village. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about our school because it's just so awesome and you can spread the word to others. With the hard work of our teachers, students, and parents, we are a level 1 neighborhood school, which means that there's no specialty behind it, no magnet, no name, just we're a neighborhood school that works hard and earned a level 1 rating with the CPS system. So we're very proud of that. If you ever walk through our halls, you'll not only see children engaged in reading and math, but you'll see them engaged in arts and music and physical fitness. We really believe and understand here that education is a holistic approach and not just about academics. So I want to say that we're really happy and proud to be hosting the Second Ward Alderman debate. I want to welcome Alyx Pattison and Brian Hopkins, our candidates for this evening. Our thanks to CAN TV for carrying this event live. If you know anybody who can't make it here today, go ahead and let them know that they can watch it on Channel 27, cable Channel 27, and on cantv.org. Thank you to Ukrainian Village Neighborhood Association, Wicker Park Committee, the East Village Association for their assistance in planning tonight's event. And tonight's moderators are Greg Hines and Hal Dardick. I'll let them introduce themselves and let us know about tonight's debate rules. So a round of applause for our moderators tonight.
Hi, I'm Greg Hines. I work for Crane Chicago Business. Do most of my work online. Thank you for coming out to this debate, and this is really a unique debate. I don't know if you quite realize it. This ward didn't exist before. There was a ward named 2, but it's nowhere near this one. This one was part of about, at least 8 other different wards, and it looks like a plate of spaghetti. But we are filling a job that no one holds now in a ward that didn't exist before, which is kind of cool.
Hi, I'm Hal Dardick. I'm a reporter with the Tribune. I've been covering City Hall now for about 6 or 7 years, so I figure I know some of the issues by now. But Greg's absolutely right. It's very unique. It comes only once every few decades that there's a brand new ward in the city of Chicago. And this ward is unique in that it spans 13 different neighborhoods. Which is where you get that plate of spaghetti that Greg's talking about. So it should be an interesting debate this evening.
You want to hear from them, not us, but let's briefly describe the rules. We're going to divide most of this evening up into 4-minute chunks where one or the other of us will ask a candidate, and they'll have a minute each to speak, and then time for rebuttal or follow-up questions. They'll each get an opening statement and a closing statement, and we have a nice little timer system set up. There's a yellow card there. When that goes up, it means they have 30 seconds. When the red one goes up, I'm not going to throw them off the stage, but that means they're supposed to be quiet and be done. And they will have an opportunity to each question each other. Who do we pick? Who gets to go first? Do we pick that? Well, I'll tell you what, we'll let ladies go first now, and at the end, so you get the first statement, you'll get the last statement of the evening. Ms. Pattison.
All right, thanks, Greg. Hey, welcome to Ukrainian Village for those of you from the other side of the ward. I see so many faces. Every neighborhood appears to be represented tonight. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for those of you who are watching online. Thank you, Ukrainian Village Neighborhood Association, Wicker Park Committee, Noble Square Homeowners Association, Columbus School, of course. Greg Hines and Hal Dardick, thank you both. And I really quickly just want to mention, welcome Alderman Joe Moreno, neighboring alderman, and 2 of my I Will sisters who ran for alderman and were defeated but put their heart and soul into it, and I respect it so much, Ann Shaw and Alyx Duty-Jones. Steve Nicotopoulos, of course. How could I almost forget you? Thank you, thank you, thank you for everything you do for our community, and thank you for being a worthy opponent, making, I think, both of us better candidates. I'm so proud to be here tonight. For those of you who have watched this campaign, you know a little bit about me and why I am running for alderman. And the first piece of that is inspired by how I grew up. I was raised by a single mom, and we struggled growing up. Sometimes we used food stamps to get by. Sometimes we In elementary school, I needed reduced school lunch, and in college, I needed Pell Grant my first year. My grandma suffered severe dementia and a number of strokes, and by the time I was 6, I was helping my mother take care of her, and we needed her Social Security and her Medicare to help us get by. And those things set me up for success. I ended up being going to work for a great Congresswoman, Schakowsky, on Capitol Hill and here in Chicago, went to a great law school. And all of that led me to understand that when government works for people, people do really great things. And that's what I want to do for all of you. I have a passion for making government work for each one of you, whether it's keeping a light on in a neighborhood so that you all can get to and from your home safely, or fixing a pothole and making sure you don't twist your ankle on the sidewalk like I did last week walking here in Ukrainian Village. That's what I want to do for all of you, and we'll get to talking a little bit more about that as the night progresses. But thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Alex. Brian.
Okay, thank you, Alex. My name is Brian Hopkins. I'm a candidate for Second Ward Alderman, and I would also like to acknowledge our hosts, Mr. Dardick and Mr. Hines, for serving on the panel, and for Principal Alyx for having us here at her school. And Principal, you have every right to be proud of being a Level 1 school. I know there's a lot of work that goes into it, and a great commitment from the staff, the faculty, and the parents to put a school like this together and to keep it humming, and especially taking over for 39-year incumbent principal, who I'm sure left a large legacy that you're filling quite nicely. So congratulations to you, and thank you for having us here tonight. And I would also like to join my opponent in acknowledging Steve Nikotopoulos. Steve, you are an outstanding candidate. I say this with all sincerity. It was actually a pleasure to run against you. You ran a high-minded campaign. You brought new ideas to the race. You were a class act through it all, and you deserved every vote you got and then some. And please, ladies and gentlemen, let's acknowledge Steve Nikotopoulos. I'm running for this office because I love just about everything about the city of Chicago, and the things that I don't love, I would like to help change with the support of the people in this room. It was a tremendous honor to be a candidate for this ward office, but it was an even greater honor to finish first place on February 24th. I take that very seriously. There's so much work that needs to be done in the city right now. We have serious challenges. We have budget issues to face. I'm running for this job because this is the job I want to do. I feel I've prepared for this my whole life. I'm ready to put my credentials out here. I'm ready to put my ideas out here before you tonight, and I think we're going to have a very good debate. So thank you for being here, and let's have a good discussion of the issues that we face as a city.
Okay, I'm going to start off, and Brian, you can start with the first question since Alex got the opening statement.
Okay.
But one of the issues here in the city, of course, is crime, and it's some ways an intractable issue no matter where you live in the city. And you both have addressed this, Brian. I believe you said you'd put 1,000 more cops on the street, which was a promise that Mayor Emanuel made, but he didn't actually hire those officers. And I think, Alex, you've likewise said that you would hire additional officers. Putting 1,000 more cops on the street would cost more than $100 million a year very quickly once those costs were ramped up. And the overtime alone would cover maybe at best a third of that. And how would you pay for those officers? And is that the real solution to reducing and preventing crime in the city? What other ways can it be addressed?
There's a lot there to answer, Hal. Let me start with the last question. Does it actually make a difference? I believe firmly that it does. Right now, 911 response times in this city are up. They're at record highs. When you dial 911 for your issue, whether it's a serious crime or a minor crime like graffiti on your wall, it's taking longer and longer to get a response from a police officer. There's really no other explanation for that than we don't have enough cops on duty to respond. Our cops are very hardworking. They're doing the best they can. They need help. So we need additional police officers. You're right. We're spending $100 million on police overtime, and that's a management issue. If we manage that properly, if we cut that by just 25%, That will allow us to hire 250 police officers in the first year. And really, that's about all the police academy can handle anyway. But you have to start with a commitment. We have to commit to adding 1,000 police officers to our roles, training them, getting them on the street. And by the way, the rookie officers will be making a much lower salary than the people with 20 and 30 years on the job that they replace. And some of that savings can be put back towards helping us hire more cops.
Okay, thank you. Alyx?
Two things. I have never said it's 1,000 cops that we need to hire because I don't actually know the answer to that. And the reason for that is because we haven't been given full detail on the overtime budget in the police department. That's the place we really need to start, is to begin to assess that as a city council, begin to ask the questions, begin to understand exactly what's happening with the overtime situation inside CPD. Crime is an issue in this ward. I've heard it on the streets. It was warm last week. We were out knocking doors in Ukrainian Village. People said, I'm worried about those shots fired on the corner of Damon and Division into a cab. It's important. Mayor Emanuel in his last budget provided additional funds to fund police on foot and bike patrol. I think that's key. I think that's critical. I serve on the local school council with 2 beat officers who really would like to get out of their cars and patrol neighborhoods. They think that's the first place to start in order to really prevent crime, really talk to neighbors, really get down deep. The other thing is, it was mentioned, prevention. We don't talk enough about that. More money for after-school programs to keep kids out of trouble, and that'll help us reduce crime as well.
All right, I'd like to follow up with Brian a little bit there, and you said you'd hire the first 250 out of overtime. I think that's probably possible. Given the city's pension crisis, where would you get the money for the others, and what else would you do to address crime just besides hiring police officers?
I've been involved in the CAPS program for 16 years. I believe firmly in community involvement. That's part of the solution. And I also agree with my opponent that programs like After School Matters, programs like Ceasefire, which is a program that I've been involved with for many years, that's part of the answer. You need to have community involvement. And I also agree when Ms. Pattison says 1,000 police isn't necessarily the exact number, but you have to have a goal. It could be 900, it could be 1,100. You have to have a goal. Government works that way. I'm committed to 1,000 police officers because that brings us accountability. If we fall short of that, we know we haven't done our job.
Well, I would say I'm not committed to 1,000 police officers because I wouldn't. How does my opponent know that that's the number we need? He just admitted he doesn't know that's the number we need. We need to run a real in-depth assessment to understand how many we need, and then we need to commit to that goal, not an unnecessary goal that we pulled out of thin air. When it comes to CAPS, CAPS is a critical part of what we need to do to reduce crime. However, I would like to see CAPS come to us more often than us being expected to go to them. I'd like to facilitate that by inviting police to come to my ward nights, come to my grocery store council on the corner days, so that you all can talk to me while talking to the police officers who serve your neighborhoods. Only when they talk to you do we have the complete dialogue that lets them understand what's happening in our neighborhoods.
Alyx, this one will go to you first. If there's anything I'm tired about writing about, and what I'm sure you're tired about hearing about, it's pensions for city workers. But if you believe the financial analysts, it's an unavoidable calamity coming not too far down the road. The reason why the city's credit rating recently was lowered by one of the bond raters to 2 levels ahead of junk. So my question is, everybody seems to be open to the idea of reducing benefits for new hires. What about reducing benefits to some degree for either people who are on the payroll now or people who have retired in the form of COLAs? What reductions, if any, would you favor for those 2 groups? And if you had been in the city council, how would you have voted on Mayor Emanuel's initial deal struck with some unions to cover 2 of the 4 cities' pension funds?
Okay, I'll take the last part first. I would have voted in support of that. I think it was well negotiated. I think the unions, they came to a good deal. However, when it comes to pensions, the first part of your question was whether we would reduce benefits for current workers or workers who've already incurred and paid into the system. And I'll tell you, I don't generally, as a matter of contract law, I am a lawyer, support that, but we also have to have the Supreme Court tell us what the law is here. There's a Supreme Court case pending. I think they're going to say we owe what we owe. There's a pretty clear contractual provision in the state constitution. It says we shall not diminish union guaranteed union benefits. And until the court has spoken, I think it's a hypothetical that I can't speak to, and I think the court is going to tell us we probably have to pay them.
Brian?
Reforming our pension system is an absolute necessity. It is completely unsustainable. It will collapse under its own weight if we don't do something, and we have to do it now. I support pension reform. My opponent, on the other hand, has recently taken $75,000 in 72 hours from the public employee unions, and they are adamantly opposed to any pension reform. They are on the record as opposing pension reform. She's put handcuffs on herself. If she's elected, she will not be in a position to advocate for pension reform because the public employees union have supported her candidacy to the tune of $75,000.
I want to follow up with both of you. I suspect you want to reply to that, but also you said that you would have voted for the pension deal the mayor struck. Well, the deal the mayor struck with the municipal and labor's funds did indeed reduce benefits for people who are on the payroll now.
Well, it was a negotiated deal. That's the difference.
So you would favor reducing
What I
benefits
favor
if
is
it's
an equal
negotiated.
negotiation between labor and the people who they work for. When we're talking about a negotiated deal, that's a different situation. Labor gets a voice, labor gets to speak. And I would support that. If they can strike the deal, then I would support that deal. When it comes to me being bought and paid for by unions, that's an interesting claim. I think one of those unions that gave me the largest contribution has some public employee, some public sector employees, but by and large, it's private sector employees, like all of the doormen on the east side of the ward who are organized by that union, and a number of healthcare workers who are private sector. In addition, the reason that they support me is because my opponent and I have a very clear difference on the record when it comes to working people. He would oppose Mayor Emanuel's $13 an hour minimum wage ordinance. I support that. He's told the Chicago Federation of Labor he's opposed to earned sick time for people so they can take care of a child or a sick loved one. I would be in favor of that. Labor supports me because I support working people, and I'm going to be proud to stand by working people.
Steve, respond to that, and also tell us what you would do in the event that Ms. Pattison is right and the Illinois Supreme Court throws out the state pension reforms on which Mayor Emanuel's are kind of based.
And by the way, part of those pension reforms were challenged by the unions. They were not universally embraced. There was a lot of controversy about that, but I do agree that unions have to have a seat at the table. Public employees are entitled to negotiate on their own behalf and for their interests, and I support that. You have to have shared sacrifice, so your partners have to be involved in making the decision. If the Supreme Court kicks this back, which I suppose is possible, we're going to go right back to the bargaining table, and we're going to start on day one with new hires being told, here's what we're going to promise you. We're going to promise you something that we can keep, not a promise that we can't sustain. That's a false approach, and I don't support it. And when it comes to negotiating for changes in the current pension system, again, we have to have the labor unions involved in it, but we know where they're coming from right now. They don't want to give anything up. They want what they have. We can't afford what they have. They're supporting my opponent because she'll join them in trying to protect what we have when we can't sustain it.
Okay. Next question, and Brian, you'll get to go first again. For this mayor's entire term, Mayor Emanuel's entire term, the city council has resisted allowing aldermen and their staffs to be probed for waste, fraud, and abuse in the same way as every other employee of the city of Chicago, through the powers of the city inspector general. Do you support extending those powers, including the right to investigate anonymous complaints to the council either through the city inspector general or the legislative inspector general?
Yes, I don't think you can have too much transparency in government. That sunshine is the best disinfectant, and that's a good thing. I support that reform. People should be allowed to call with anonymous complaints for their own protection because sometimes there's retribution when someone blows a whistle and they're afraid to come forward. So it helps uncover things that are happening in city and county government that shouldn't. When I was working for the Cook County Finance Committee, I helped co-write some of the ethics legislation reform that passed and that made Cook County a more ethical place to operate. I believe we can do the same for the city. I understand why some of the aldermen are resisting, but if I'm elected, I'll be a yes vote when it comes to increasing transparency and reforming ethics.
Alex, same question?
I don't disagree. I would wholeheartedly endorse moving the powers of the Inspector General from the Legislative Inspector General to the City Inspector General. And I believe that they should be able to investigate anonymous complaints. At first, I had some reservations about that because I was concerned about the appointment power residing in Mayor Emanuel's, the executive branch, because they are, after all, being investigating legislative branch. But I've gotten over that. I read the ordinance. I think it's a tight ordinance. I think it provides for plenty of safeguards to protect individual aldermen from abuse. And I also would support the pieces of the ordinance that would fully fund the city inspector general so that he wouldn't be subject to any political retribution on our part as a city council member. And I would also start with transparency reforms in my own office. Legislative Inspector General has had a hard time investigating individual aldermanic offices for political work. My employees, my staff will be able to give you timesheets that you will see, and my own schedule will be online as well.
Brian, I just want to clarify, you're saying that you would extend the powers of the city inspector general instead of the legislative inspector general?
I think it's less important where the powers reside than it is that it's completely independent. When I was with Cook County government, I actually staffed the search committee, a national search committee that resulted in the hiring of the current inspector general for Cook County. And one of the things that we felt was very important was that individual was allowed to operate with full autonomy and full independence, and also in cooperation with criminal investigation authorities. The state's attorney has a public integrity unit, and they can investigate allegations of criminal acts. Very often, criminal investigations begin with an anonymous tip that's ethics in its nature and evolves into a criminal investigation. So I think it's important that the Inspector General have complete autonomy and independence and have a close working relationship when it comes time to shift gears from an ethics violation to a criminal act.
Could I follow up on that? Because it is a point of disagreement. I do support moving the Inspector General from the Legislative Inspector General to the City Inspector General. And I think it's an important point, and here's the reason why. Right now, the Legislative Inspector General doesn't have autonomy and ability to continue an investigation into a city department. So if there's an aldermanic office that is doing something on the sly with streets and sanitation or any other city department, the investigation artificially stops at the end of the aldermanic office. Their powers don't go beyond into the remainder of the city government. And that's an important distinction.
Alyx, I think it's your turn to go first on the next one. You all are fortunate to live in a ward that is popular. People want to live there, and the developers want to build there. And there's been a lot of building in this ward. There may be a lot more in the next few years, but not everybody is always happy with all that. So my question is, what is your general sense as to whether the ward, in whole or in part, is developed enough, needs more development? How would you make your decisions on whether to approve necessary rezonings? Would you abide by the wishes of any advisory group, or would you make up your own mind?
There's a lot of parts to that question. I'll take the first one. Is the ward overdeveloped or underdeveloped in whole or in part? In whole or in part. The east side of the ward, I think I hear from residents by and large that they think it's dense enough. They're overdeveloped. They feel like there could be room for development in other parts of the city. On the west side of the ward, we have some pretty great developments that are coming in that are remaking our neighborhoods, I think in good ways. Alderman Moreno has been responsible for some pretty great developments on the border of our ward that I think are really fantastic. When it comes to my philosophy of development, it is not quite community-led. I will listen absolutely to every community group and start there. That will be the starting point. But ultimately, you hire an alderman to make decisions for you. That you have to allow them to have the autonomy and give them the trust to make the decision about the ward. We start with the community. We don't end there. But I may have a different viewpoint.
There's two mistakes that you can make as an alderman or as an elected official of any capacity, really, in the city. And the first is to take steps to cease development and economic activity. You lose jobs, you lose residents, you lose the quality of life. It's a mistake to just be opposed to all development. The flip side of that coin is to turn things over to developers. And developers tend to be powerful individuals and powerful companies. And if you give them the latitude to run roughshod over a process, they'll take that latitude and they'll take advantage and they'll build things that the community doesn't want. They'll build things that have an adverse impact on the community. The sweet spot lies in the middle. And that's where I've worked and thrived, actually, in Streeterville for the past 16 years. I've helped residents have a voice at the table when developers were proposing something for the neighborhood. There are times we said no. There are times we said maybe. There are times we said convince us. Let's see if we can come to a consensus. Let's see if we can come to an agreement. And there were times when we simply opposed a development because it wasn't right for the community. That's the kind of approach and that's the kind of experience I'll bring to the job as Second Ward Alderman.
I want to.
If we could save the applause till afterwards, please.
Please. I want to follow up on one particular one. Brian, I'll let you go first on this. Not too far from here is the former Finkel Steel Company property. Big site, a lot of interest in what happens with that. Brian, your thoughts on that, and then Alyx?
Yes, it's one of the reasons I'm running for this office. I'm very excited about the process of being able to steer a ship, to bring all the community groups together, all the neighborhood associations, all the stakeholders, come up with a master plan for what the neighborhood wants, for what we think is the best use of that land. Much of it is abandoned now that Finkel's gone, that demolition's already begun. We know something's going to happen there. We don't know what. The people who should determine what are largely in this room. And as the next alderman, I'm going to make sure that it's the residents that have a voice when key decisions are made about how to redevelop that land. Because whatever we do there has to serve the city. It has to create jobs. It has to be something that we can look back on years from now and be proud of the fact that we were part of the decision-making process that led to that redevelopment.
You started by saying, I think it was Greg, that this is a once-in-a-lifetime ward. Well, this is a once-in-a-lifetime development. For those of you who don't realize how much acreage is in the planned manufacturing district where Finkel Steel resides, it is 115 total acres. About 42 are up for potential redevelopment right now, and depending on what happens with the zoning, it could be more or less, and depends on who sells. One thing that we have to start with fundamentally, the two neighborhoods that surround it, Bucktown and Lincoln Park, have to be able to have a huge voice in what happens there. But also, the master plan it must include a transportation plan. Clybourne and North Avenue are notoriously backed up. It's all the time. When you open that land up, you have a real opportunity to start moving people across a bridge, across the river, and really unplugging those congested arteries.
Okay, Brian, I want to meld in a community question at this point. And as this ward's been described in so many different ways, whether it's a dog's breakfast, spaghetti blob,
A lobster.
a lobster, which it does look a little bit like. There's 13 different neighborhoods. So I think a difficult part of being alderman in this ward, and I've seen this before in other wards where they're so complex like this, is actually hearing all of the people in all the different neighborhoods. So I want to know what each of you would do in terms of making sure all these neighborhoods are heard. Would you hold community meetings? What would you do in terms of office hours, ward locations, and the influence of chambers of commerce and neighborhood associations?
Yeah, 13 different neighborhoods creates a tremendous workload. Bring it on. That's the reason I'm running for this job. I've been doing that type of work in one particular neighborhood for 16 years. I know how to do it. I have a track record of experience representing a neighborhood, working on community issues. What I need to do is duplicate what I've done 13 different areas. I know it's going to be a difficult challenge. That's just the nature of the geography of the Second Ward. I don't think anyone in this room, including my opponent, would say it was a good idea to draw the ward the way it was. But we have to live with it. I'm prepared to do that. I'm prepared to represent this entire ward. I have pledged publicly to have a ward office on the west side of the ward. I will be present here. This neighborhood is not unfamiliar to me. I'm a Chicagoan. Chicago has been a part of my life, my whole life, and I will serve every neighborhood in the Second Ward equally and with as much passion. I'm running for this job because I want to do this job, and I want to do it for every resident of the Second Ward, no matter which of those 13 neighborhoods they live in.
Alex?
Well, we know from experience running in this race that 11 or 13, depending on your definition, 11 different neighborhoods will run us and challenge us because we have appeared and made appearances and agreed to debates in every single one of those communities, and each and every one of them is fantastic and fabulous in their own right. I could think of no greater honor and privilege than to represent each and every one, and I can't wait to do it. But the way you do it and the way you are an effective alderman is starting by listening. Each neighborhood has their own concerns, and each neighborhood will tell you about them. In Wicker Park, they want to protect their landmark districts. In Ukrainian Village last week, walking dogs, I heard people telling me about the gunfire surrounding this neighborhood. In Pulaski Park, same thing. So what it starts with is listening. And then my second goal will be to create a community group or a second ward committee that will allow neighbors to start to explain to each other their needs, so that I can go back to communities and neighborhoods and say, this is why I made a decision to spend menu money in, say, Pulaski Park, or this is why I made a decision to fix this issue in Wicker Park. And the neighbors, I hope, will help me have an understanding and convey that to their neighbors back in their neighborhoods about why I'm doing something.
Okay, for follow-up, Brian, what specifically, I hear your commitment to everybody in the ward, but what specifically would you do to make sure those people were heard in terms of office hours, meetings? Do you have some sort of plan in place to do that?
I will be visible. I will be present. As I said, I will have an office. It'll be fully staffed. It'll be on the west side of the ward. It only makes sense because people who live on the east side of the ward can access City Hall. It's close, generally speaking. You can get there easily for public transportation. So to have two offices to serve the ward as far apart as possible dictates that the ward office should be somewhere in this community. I'll be present. I will come to community meetings. Actually, I've been going to community meetings for the past 16 years. I have a 9-to-5 job, but in addition to that, I would get off work and I would go to a neighborhood meeting. I would go to a condo board meeting. I would go to a CAPS meeting. I would go to a court advocates meeting. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing for all these years. I'm just going to be doing it in all the communities of the second ward.
Okay, and Alex, you gave one specific of how you do it. Any more detail that
Yeah,
you'd like to
absolutely. Actually, I pledge to be one of the most accessible of all of those 50 aldermen. And the way that I'll do that is by traveling to you. I have put on my website and committed to this, having council on your corner events where I come to your grocery store. For those of you who live in Sandburg, you know how many times I've stood out in front of Potash Market, Treasure Island, Gold Coast, Mariano's in Ukrainian Village. I will make it easy for you to tell me what's going on. Neighborhood festivals, I'll be there for you. The other thing I intend to do, at least once a month, I will have Saturday office hours, and at least once a week, I will have evening office hours, because government, again, going back to my opening remarks, government must work for you. It's not fair for you to have to come get a parking permit or whatever your ward business is and take time off of your work day always. We need to be there to serve you. So I'll have accessible office hours for you.
I too have a community question at this point. Mr. Hopkins, this will go to you first. The subject is transportation. There's this wonderful little thing called BRT that's proposed for Ashland Avenue. Some people like it, some people don't like it. Some people think we ought to instead just try to get the Ashland Avenue Express bus revitalized. In conjunction with that, would you also comment on your opponent mentioned how North Avenue and the Claiborne corridor often are pretty difficult to get through. Mention what ideas you might have to unclog them.
Yeah, and so is Ashland, by the way. I have a campaign office on Ashland. I have a nice view out the window from the storefront to see the traffic back up, and rush hour on both ends is expanding. It's eventually going to meet in the middle, and it'll be gridlock for 12 hours a day. I do not think the Ashland Avenue BRT is a good idea at this point. For me, and I've said this all along, the deal breaker is the no left turn, but there's other issues there as well. However, the future of urban transportation is not the automobile. It can't be. It just won't work anymore. It's not sustainable. We have to seek transportation alternatives. We have to find ways to improve the bus system, but we have to live in the here and now, and to go from what we have now to a BRT that displaces so much traffic on an arterial street and pushes traffic off into the neighborhoods. It's a non-starter, and it won't work. However, I do applaud the creative thinking that led to it, and I think we have to continue to seek solutions, and we have to fund mass transit.
Alex?
I love the idea of a bus rapid transit system. I think Ashland Avenue is the entirely wrong place to put it. And the first reason is something my opponent mentioned, the left turn issue is a big deal. But the second reason is what I've heard from all of you in terms of your neighborhoods. You're very concerned about people pulling off of Ashland Avenue and working their way through your neighborhoods at high speeds. Anybody who lives on the west side of the ward understands full well that when you're driving west on North Division or Chicago Avenue, the first place you can turn and sort of become free is Ashland Avenue. And if we take that away, the next place we'll be able to turn is Western Avenue, which means a lot of people are going to start peeling off into neighborhoods, increasing traffic where kids are playing, where schools are located. And I just don't think Ashland is the right place for the BRT currently. And I would say we do need to start with at least experimenting on bringing back that express bus on Ashland. And I never see a whole slew of people waiting for buses on Ashland. So I'm not quite sure exactly what their what issue, their problem they're trying to solve with the BRT.
So
Can
let
I-
me
can I
follow up.
respond?
Let me follow up with both of you. I heard you both say, "Nah, I'm all for innovation in transportation, but not this innovation. The automobile has reached its limits. I love mass transportation." Okay, so you told us what you're not going to do. What are you going to do to make it work better?
There is an engineering and a technological solution, and some of it is actually part of the controversy right now about red light cameras and speed enforcement. The same technology that we're using right now for punitive purposes and frankly for revenue generating purposes can also be used to regulate traffic. It's done in other jurisdictions. Video technology can time traffic lights better. There's technology that can register whether a person has their left turn signal on, and that can trigger a light to allow traffic to flow better. We can't widen the roads pretty much in the second ward. They're about as wide as we can make them. So we can't really increase capacity by building our way out of this, but there is traffic technology that exists that other cities are using. Innovative cities like Portland, like Austin are doing these things now. We could bring them to Chicago and help traffic flow smoother in some of these congested areas like Clybourne and North.
Two things. So for those of you who are not familiar with the west side of the ward, over 1,000 people a day in good weather bike Milwaukee Avenue, the Milwaukee corridor from Logan Square through Wicker Park, Bucktown, and Pulaski Park to the city center. That's a pretty amazing feat, and we should be encouraging that. When it comes to unplugging North and Clybourne as a specific issue, I think we ought to go back to the basics, go back to the beginning. Chicago was a city founded on the river and the lake, and we aren't using the river as a transportation corridor. We should be. It doesn't require a heavy infrastructure lift, but we could potentially be putting things like water buses on that river and moving a lot of people through some pretty major developments. Lathrop Homes, whatever happens at Finkel Steel, and also the development at Kingsbury in Chicago could move people to the loop pretty quickly.
Okay, in the interests of getting whichever one of you wins this contest off on the wrong side of the mayor, I want to ask a sort of a thought-provoking question here. This city council has managed to push an agenda, this mayor has managed to push his agenda through the city council during his term with a few tweaks here and there, and for the most part, and not entirely, but for the most part, little dissent. On what issue during the past 4 years, whether it's speed cameras, the parking meter lease changes, the increase in the city's borrowing authority, one of the specific budget items that has been in each of his 4 plans, would you have voted against during your tenure if you had been in office?
Start with me.
Yes.
I can only pick one.
Well, you can pick. Go ahead. Just let it rip.
There's a lot. I mean, school closing implementation, I thought that was handled horribly, and the results speak for themselves. You have a lot of dissatisfaction. Even people who agree that schools need to be closed are highly critical of the way it was done. Communities weren't involved. People are very angry about that. The transition to the welcoming schools didn't really go very well. The parking meter deal, since you mentioned it, yes, I think we could have done much better. Free Sunday parking, it was just a giveaway. I mean, we could have gotten a much better deal out of that if we're going to reopen that horrible contract. One of the things that I would have liked to have done is shorten the duration of it. I mean, have it end in our lifetime instead of in the lifetime of our grandchildren, That's privatizing Midway Airport. I do not want to go down that path. I think that's a big mistake. You know, we've sold the Skyway, we've sold the parking meters, we want to sell the airports. Terrible idea. I would oppose that as well.
Alex?
I too disagree with the way schools were closed, and I don't think we needed to close nearly as many. Also, the follow-up in the school closures was just handled so poorly. I serve on the local school council at Jose de Diego in Wicker Park. The General Assembly has commented and said that if you were going to close schools and you were going to have welcoming schools kids coming into a school, you needed to have enough funding to follow that through so that the kids were welcomed, the staffs were welcomed, everybody adjusted. We were given one year's worth of funding at the school, and then it was cut off instantly. And right now we're experiencing trouble at the school, in part because we're trying to blend communities with huge class sizes where teachers can't manage students and their adjustments. So I think that was one that I would absolutely have voted against and disagree with.
Hal, I thought of another one.
Oh, okay, well, for follow-up, and I see you're both hoping that Chuy Garcia gets elected, but I wanted to, you can give me your other one, and also I'd like to hear what you think about the new speed cameras, relatively new speed cameras, and the red light cameras. There's some movement on that in the council, whether that needs to change at all.
The other one was the infrastructure trust. I was highly skeptical that would work. Again, creative idea, and you always want to encourage creative thinking, but at the get-go, it just didn't look like it was going to be viable when you're asking the private sector to take financial risk to build public infrastructure with no clear path to profitability. It just doesn't seem to work, and you know, here we are years later, and it's barely gotten off the ground for that reason. So we've wasted a lot of time talking about how we can pay for the sewer replacement project or pay for all the road repairs and fix the potholes and all those other capital needs when this financing mechanism was really a non-starter. So we need to sort of abandon that and hit the reset button.
Quickly, speed cameras good?
Traffic technology, as I said earlier, is a good thing. It's a tool, and you can use a tool for positive purposes or you can use a tool for destructive purposes. We've used red light cameras and speed cameras for destructive purposes. That needs to change. That doesn't mean the technology's bad. That doesn't mean it's a good thing to blast 60 miles an hour through a yellow light after it changes red. Nobody wants to see that. So the technology can be used, but it has to be used effectively, and it has to have the trust of the public. Right now, it does not. So we have to completely redesign that program, both the speed cameras and the red light cameras. Do it in a way that people believe it.
Thank you. And Alex, same two questions, speed, red lights, and if there's anything else you didn't get to hit in your first round.
Yeah, the first round, I'll go back to that. The first place I would also, or the second thing I would also have voted against is privatization in virtually every instance. I can't imagine why we would ever sell or convert a public asset to somebody else's gain. These are public assets. We need to hang on to them to the extent that money or a profit is to be made from them. The profit should belong to the collective, each and every single one of us. When it comes to speed and red light cameras, the problem with them is that they have been screwed up from the very beginning. The contract was, questionable ethics surrounding all of the contracts. You know, we've set Chicago residents up to fail by shortening the yellow lights. I'm willing to look at and keep those cameras if we are open to the reforms. I mean, aldermen are talking about communities deciding whether there's a countdown clock. Those sorts of reforms absolutely have to be enacted and looked at, and I want to play a role in that. I'm not ready to write the whole program off, in part because it is a revenue generator, and that's a horrible, horrible reason to have had them, but now we have a $70 million hold-a-plug. And I will say, I've gotten a ticket, and to the extent I got a ticket around a school, I think we all probably should be ticketed, and we don't have the police power to be giving us those tickets.
Thank you.
Unlike my colleague here, I have a nice softball question for both of the candidates that can possibly cause any problems.
I think he's lying.
You go first, Alex. It's just your turn, sorry.
I get what I asked for.
Not personal. The question is, what commitment, if any, are you making as to whether you will be a full-time alderman with no other source of earned income if you're elected? And what kind of commitment are you making, if any, about running for another job once you become alderman?
I am committed, absolutely committed to being an overtime alderman. As to the second question, my opponent apparently has taken to talking on porches about me wanting to run for Congress. I don't know where he's getting this idea. I want this job. I want to be an alderman. I think that what happens when it comes to people who have an interest in reforming city government, they say, you'd be better off in Springfield. You'd be better off in Washington. The exact reason I'm running is because in city council, we need to have people who are ready, willing, able to start asking hard questions. Why did we privatize this? Why are we spending money the way we're spending it? Why are we continuing to bond? Why are we bonding for things like poop bags? I mean, that sounds trivial, but I mean, bonding and borrowing for things that we absolutely could do without in the now. So I'm prepared to do that on day one, and I want to do it, can't wait to do it, and not intending to run for any other office.
Steve? Sorry. Brian?
I'll answer Alex's question first. I'm getting it from close mutual friends of ours who tell me that you've told them that. And
Liar,
I'm
liar,
not
pants
saying
on
it as a
fire.
criticism of you, Alex. It's, there's nothing wrong with ambition. I'm not saying it as a criticism, but I'm running for the job that I want. And yes, absolutely, I will be a full-time alderman. I've been a full-time employee of Cook County government for 20 years. Before that, I was a full-time employee of our great state comptroller, Dawn Clark-Netsch. I was a full-time employee of the Illinois General Assembly, and I've been a public servant literally since the day I graduated from college. I've been full-time in my public service. But in addition to that, as I said earlier, I've also been a volunteer, and I've spent countless hours doing things that I believed in passionately, not because I was getting a paycheck for it, not because I thought it was my job, but because it's something that I felt was the right thing to do. It's an extension of who I am and what I believe in. I will absolutely be a full-time alderman. I have no other interest in any other job, and if I'm fortunate enough to be elected alderman, I plan to stay the alderman of the 2nd Ward as long as the voters will have me in that job.
Okay, I just want to follow up to make crystal clear the differences between intentions and promises. You will or will not work as a lawyer or anything else, and you absolutely no chance that you would run for any other job if you're elected.
I will. Are we talking to me first?
Yes.
I do not, and I will not practice law while being an alderman. That I already am not. I haven't been employed at my former law firm for over a year and a half. As for running for office, I can't imagine. I won't rule it out for in the future. I won't do it in my first or second term. That's for sure. And one thing that I am wholeheartedly certain that I want to do is Finkel Steel. Once that starts, I want to see that through to the end. That could be a 15-year project.
Thank you. Brian?
And yes, I believe my opponent, her law license is currently inactive, so she might want to explain that later. But I will commit to serving as the 2nd Ward alderman. I have no further interest in any other office. As I said, if I'm elected to the 2nd Ward aldermanic position, I will stay in that job as long as the voters will have me there.
Let's give her an opportunity to explain it now.
Absolutely. It reflects a total lack of understanding of the legal profession on my opponent's part. Here's the deal. Lawyers have to pay about $500 a year to register for an active license. I didn't want to pay the $500 while I'm running for office and unemployed. Tomorrow, I could pay that $500 and be an active lawyer again. So when he talks about active or inactive and thinks it's a gotcha moment, he's totally not understanding the profession.
Okay, I want to turn to another community topic here. Greg already asked a little bit about the Finkel Steel site, and you've both enunciated how you'd approach that development and get the public input. But the community seems very concerned, as far as I can tell here, about the traffic and how that development would affect the traffic. Plan to make sure cars and bikers can move more smoothly through that area of the 2nd Ward. And there's also concerns about plans to take over the swing bridge to use for bicycle riders, and how to better use bridges and which streets should be widened or extended. So focus on the traffic aspects of this site and what you'd like to see.
Well, there's no question that a redevelopment of that site is going to have a tremendous impact on the traffic in the surrounding area. I mean, right now, there's very little activity going on other than, by the way, the scrap yards, which I firmly believe need to be relocated. They don't belong there, and it's time to find a new home for them. But whoever comes in to redevelop that site, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 major developers, and they'll have to be major because we're talking about a huge capital requirement just to step up to the table. As part of what they do, they're going to have to fund, at least partially, major infrastructure improvements. We're going to need another east-west arterial corridor there. We may need additional access to the Kennedy Expressway. All that's going to be very expensive, and it's going to have to be paid for, at least in part, by the people who are stepping up as developers and who are going to make money on the development project, and they're going to have to put some of that money back into traffic and transit infrastructure that's going to make it easier for the rest of us to get around.
I desperately wish I had that map up here so I could show all of you on a map. There are, if you look at Clybourne and North Avenue, there's a number of things that have to be done at the Finkel Steel site. The first one is bringing back the Clybourne Avenue express bus. But also, once that land is open up, there are at least two possibilities. One is Dickens, where you can build a bridge to the other side of the river and start to connect people and let them out on Ashland and or Elston. Elston is not a very well-traveled route right now. A lot of people don't realize where it goes. I'd love to see us all start using Elston again. The river, again, is another place, another mode of transportation. It's underutilized. If you've ever taken a water taxi, or if you've never taken a water taxi, try it. It's amazing how quickly you can get places for a $3 boat ride. But if we could start thinking about using it as a bus lane, I think that's the right thing to do.
Okay, I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to ask each other a question on this one. So why don't you start first, and then
A question specifically related to
specifically
Finkel?
about the Finkel Steel site. Unless you don't have one, I'll go ahead. And you didn't.
Well, let's widen it out.
Okay.
Let's widen it out.
Yeah, all right. I'm with that.
Matter
Go ahead.
of fact, let's have a little drawing of who gets to go first.
Oh,
Pick one. All right, open it up. Who is it?
You were anticipating this?
Yeah, I was.
Okay. Alex.
All right,
I go
Alex,
first.
You go first. You get to ask him something, then he gets to ask you something.
about Finkel or not? This time,
Right.
about anything. I have a good one. So you all have received a mailer recently that talks about my desire to raise all of your taxes and accusing me of believing that money grows on trees. Why did you omit the fact that you support the same sales tax increase on sales tax on services statewide that I do?
Because I don't support it. I think it's a bad idea. My opponent is on the record as believing it would generate
You're on the record
$450 million.
in the Sun-Times or the Tribune as saying, yes, you support it. I have the questionnaire right here.
Okay, well, I've changed my mind then. Because
Okay.
I think it's a bad idea.
So he changes his mind when it's convenient to put that in mail.
And what I've said was if the state of Illinois wants to take action in the General Assembly to expand the sales tax to services, that's fine. I wouldn't tell them not to, and I wouldn't object to it. But if I'm an alderman, I'm going to object to any effort to expand the sales tax to services. Ms. Pattison thinks it could generate $450 million. That's $450 million that you will pay every time you go to access those services, and I don't think that's the way out of our budget mess. So I would vote no on that. I oppose it, and I'm very clear for the record going forward.
It's not an option for you to vote for it. It's a sales tax on services in Springfield, which you have committed to supporting in writing.
And we also have home rule authority, which would give us the ability in the city council to decide what we want to tax and what we don't want to tax.
Not on services.
Even on services.
Not on services.
Okay.
You need enabling legislation at the state level first.
All right, your turn to ask her a question.
Okay, who did you vote for alderman on February 24th?
Joe Moreno.
Okay. I think it's important when you ask for people to vote for you that you can actually vote for yourself. My opponent is not a resident of the 2nd Ward, and I am. She's been campaigning for 2 years. She's had 2 years to move into the ward, 2 years to show commitment to the people of this ward that she will live here if she represents them. She hasn't done so, and I'm sure she has her reasons, but the fact remains. I have been a resident of my neighborhood, Streeterville, which is one of the 2nd Ward communities, longer than my opponent has been a
Do I
resident
get
of the
to
state of
answer
Illinois.
the question? Or, okay.
Please.
Yeah, so I have not been campaigning for 2 years. I've been campaigning for 14 months. And I've enjoyed every minute of it, by the way. This ward is a disaster. The map is a disaster. And for those of you who know Ukrainian Village, there are a number of you here. I wake up in the morning, I live at Western and Division. And when I get up in the morning and I walk my dogs and I go for a run, it is through the Western neighborhoods in this ward. I got gerrymandered around and screwed around my neighborhood, the only block in Ukrainian Village, not in the ward, for political purposes. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't feel it's appropriate to be separated from my community. When it comes to why I didn't move, here's where where development and my Aldermanic office hit the road, or the rubber hits the road when it comes to developers. A developer left my condo association and me high and dry, and walked away with a huge, huge issue that we all had to resolve. I couldn't walk away from a huge special assessment that some of my neighbors couldn't afford to pay, so I couldn't move. I'm stuck there as a result until that's resolved, which actually it just got resolved in December. I'd be happy to move into the second ward if elected, and my reasons I think are pretty pure for wanting to represent it.
Time, please.
It's part of my neighborhood.
And she's currently a candidate based on a loophole, and I don't think that's right.
Timekeeper, do we
I'm
have
currently
time
a
for one more?
candidate based
Do we have
on
time
the
for one
law.
more round, or we need two more topics? Okay.
Okay. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, and maybe some people in the audience won't necessarily like the way I ask this question. But I've been studying municipal finance for 30 years. I've been studying Chicago budgets for 6 years. And the way the city has avoided property sales and gas tax increases during the past 4 years and whittled down a little bit at the pensions, sped up the water and sewer pipe work, is by increasing taxes, fees, and fines to the tune of $700 million a year in a way that arguably is harder on those that can least afford it, whether it's the 911 tax, whether it's the cable TV tax, whether it's the parking taxes. All those things can be viewed as regressive taxes. A property tax is the broadest power of the city to act without the state's authority, and it is deductible on your federal income tax return. So the same level of taxation through property tax is cheaper for the residents. So why have you ruled out a property tax when it's one of the ways that a lot of the experts say will be an inevitable piece of solving the pension crisis? And why is it a last resort when it may be more advantageous to taxpayers than some other taxes? So I'll start with you, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, just about all those taxes that you mentioned at some level are regressive, including the property tax, which has no relationship to the taxpayer's ability to pay. I mean, you have older people who are on fixed incomes living in very large homes that 20 years ago weren't worth a fraction of what they are today. They're staying there. Their property tax bill is through the roof. It's not their fault, and they want to stay in their home. So that's one of the reasons that I've ruled out a property tax increase. But really, the main reason is just looking at the Second Ward. Second Ward homeowners pay among the highest property taxes in the city. Our assessed valuations in the neighborhoods of the Second Ward, we're victims of our own success. The property values are high, the assessed valuation goes up. Any property tax increase in the levy that the city imposes hits the residents of the Second Ward disproportionately high. We're already paying our fair share. In fact, we're paying more than our fair share. Second Ward residents pay more in property taxes than we get back in city services. So as an alderman, I'm not going to go back to the people who are already paying more than their fair share and say, you know what, you've got to pay even more. It isn't fair, it isn't right, and there's other revenue sources that are better.
Alex?
I'd love to get back to asking that question again of the opponent. But I think the setup of your question was, why have you ruled it out?
Well, in your case, I believe your stance is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's a last resort.
My stance on property taxes is that it would only be raised as a last resort. And here's where there's a key difference between me and my opponent. He has not named a single way he would pay for any of our obligations. Every single person in this city, man, woman, and child, owes $7,000 per person for our pension debt, our unfunded pension liabilities. In addition to that, we have about $16 billion in bond debt we have to pay coming due. He hasn't suggested a single, in fact, when he suggested that he would be in support of a statewide sales tax on services that would distribute to the city of Chicago $450 million a year from state funds, he said he was against it, for it. Now he seems to be against it. He has proposed no way to solve this issue. Someone has to be an adult in the room. The mayor has said as recently as March 19th that it would be irresponsible and dishonest to rule out anything at this point. And so that's where I stand on the issue.
Okay, thank you. Brian, okay, so sales tax increase statewide, city sharing it would be okay. Maybe you can weigh in a little bit on casinos, which the mayor has mentioned, and tell me, there's going to have to be a city component to this, no matter what the state
Right.
does. What would you do at the support at the city level in terms
Well,
of raising revenue?
I do support a Chicago-based casino, and I think if the city held a license and it were near McCormick Place where we were capturing money from tourists and conventioneers, that's a good thing. That could help generate revenue for the city. That's one. My opponent's right. I haven't named just one. I've actually named four, several of them just in some of the recent debates. I'll give you another one. In the
Zero.
city of Chicago right now, we have 16 employees for every for every 6 managers. In the private sector, it's 6 employees for every 1 manager. So we can change that. We can save $100 million by just copying what the private sector does and having more line employees supervised by 1 manager. We would save $100 million. That gets us a third of the way to the $300 million budget deficit we're looking at. Some other ideas include an audit of the city healthcare system. We haven't done a dependent audit in many years. Every time we do that in Cook County, we save somewhere around $10 to $20 million. We could also migrate from a mainframe system to a server-based system in the city, save about $5 million. There's a lot of ideas that I've looked at already on how we can cut the budget, how we can save money. I'll do that before I'll raise the property taxes. If you
thank
vote
you.
as a last resort, you're still voting yes on a property tax increase. It doesn't matter if it's a last resort or a first resort.
That's time now. Okay, Alex, specifically, are there other city revenue, casino first, and then are there other city ways of either reducing expenses or raising revenue that you would look to?
So yeah, on this, my opponent and I agree when it comes to a city-owned casino. I would support that. I don't think it should be at Navy Pier, and I don't think it should be downtown, but I do support a city-owned license for that revenue generation purposes. I also think this is a pretty darn great city, and a lot of people would want to come here. And right now, we're just letting money flow out of our city to Indiana, and I think that should stop. When it comes to other ideas was the second part of the question other ideas for revenue?
Yeah, other ideas that are within the control of the city council and that don't rely on the state.
Well, I don't, as a hypothetical, I'm not willing to start at the city level. I'm not. I think that the first place to start is in Springfield, and we should be having a distributive share, our 2.25% share of a sales tax on services at the state level.
One idea for cutting city costs?
Well, I'll tell you. So I give great hope for the new independent budget office that has been created that will help advise the city council to find ways to cut costs. Recently, just last week, I think it was, maybe 2 weeks ago in the newspaper, we discovered out of the blue that we're paying about $3.5 million a year for garbage collection at private buildings that nobody knew about. I have faith that if we work that independent budget office and go line item by line item, we'll start to find those kinds of efficiencies, and I'd like to do that as a council member.
Okay, last question from me, and then we'll go to closing. Regardless of what either of you say, and I have no reason to distrust either of you, it doesn't matter anything if somebody's pulling your strings once you get in the city council. You both have supporters. John Daly, some aldermen from other wards, the unions, Jan Schakowsky. Brian first. Tell us why we should believe you when you say that you're going to be an independent and you're going to make up your own mind and you're not going to have your chain pulled.
Believe me, because I have a 16-year history of doing just that very thing. During my time as a leader in SOAR, during my time as president of my neighborhood association, there were times when I adamantly opposed things that were very popular with the administration. The mayor at that time just happened to have the same last name as the person who chaired the committee that I worked for in Cook County government. It never stopped me. I did the right thing every time. I represented the neighborhood. I represented the interests of the residents. That's why I'm running for this office. That's why independent leaders like Tony Preckwinkle has endorsed me. Independent leaders like Brendan Riley, one of the most independent city council members, is fully in support of my candidacy. I'm my own man, and no one asked me to run for this job. This was a decision that I made on my own because of my career, my passion for public service. I'll make my decisions based on what the best interests of my constituents are and nothing else.
So I'll tell you, because actions speak louder than words. I'm the only candidate in this campaign who hasn't wrapped myself in the loving arms of the current mayor. I mean, he has not endorsed either one of us, and yet you are all getting mail pieces that have my opponent pictured right next to him. You wouldn't believe the pressure we're both getting, I'm sure, to endorse one or the other. I'm sure he got it. I'm getting pressure to endorse one or the other. And I have steadfastly stood by my desire to run and serve as an independent alderman. And I won't budge from it. You won't see me in mail pictured with either one of them, because I will serve you. The whole logo, my whole goal has been to put the second ward first. It will be to put the second ward first, and nobody will own me, and I won't be beholden to anybody. Lots of independent folks support me too, Senator Durbin, both the Sun-Times and the Tribune, and there's a reason for that, because I don't owe anybody anything, and I'm only going to be there to serve you.
Let's pursue. Let's.
Greg, can I rebut? I have talked
I
to
know,
both
but
Mayor Emanuel and Chuy Garcia.
Hang on. You're gonna get your shot. For the record, would either one of you care to tell us who you are voting for mayor? And for the record, is your campaign working with the campaign of either of the runoff candidates for mayor?
Yes, but I will start by saying that I have spoken both to Mayor Emanuel and to Commissioner Garcia personally. Neither of them have asked me to endorse them. I've experienced no pressure whatsoever. I believe my opponent when she says she has received pressure, because as I mentioned earlier, she got $75,000 in 72 hours from two unions that are strongly supporting Commissioner Garcia. So I'm sure she's under a lot of pressure by that to toe the line. $75,000 is a lot of money, and it has a lot of influence, and I understand the pressure that she's probably under to go along and support Commissioner Garcia. I'm voting for Mayor Emanuel. He has not endorsed me, as I said. I think he's the right man for the job. I also think Commissioner Garcia is a very good man. I've worked with him at Cook County government. I know him. I trust him. I just don't think he's up to the job of mayor right now, and that's why I'm supporting Mayor Emanuel.
I voted for Mayor Emanuel on February 24th. I'm open. It's a different race now to listening to both of them. The pressure I'm getting is coming from supporters of the mayor, and not anybody related to any of the contributions I have received. In fact, I have been told that more support will go to my opponent if I continue to not endorse, and that's been the pressure that I'm getting. So no matter what, I have enough resources to compete to tell you all my story and to talk with all of you, and I will promise and pledge to be an independent alderman. Now, that does not mean that I disagree with, out of the box, either of the mayoral candidates on any issues. I will collaborate and respectfully work with both of them. I intend to be a consensus builder, but my job is to work for you, and I am a firm believer in an independent legislative body, one that makes its own decisions, one that does not allow itself to be marginalized as an actual player in the city and in the structure of city government. We were intended to be a strong city council and a weak mayoral system. The legislative branch of this city council has to start asking questions, has to take responsibility for their legislative duties, and that's the kind of alderman I will be for all of you.
Okay, thank you very much. And the closing statements, I guess, do we want to do one more question of each other? The closing. One more?
Yeah.
Oh.
We got 3 extra minutes.
We got
3 extra minutes.
Okay, let's do.
Wow.
I like the.
I do too. You get to ask the first question this time.
Alyx, you have, for a period of time, denied any involvement in the parking meter deal that was crafted by your former law firm at a time when you were a partner with that law firm. And since that time, many of your former partners have contributed tens of thousands of dollars to your campaign. You have told us that you had no involvement. Yet, when you were asked that same question at the last debate that we appeared at Old Town, what was your involvement in the parking meter deal? Your answer was not much. So, which is it?
It was none. I think my answer was
No,
none.
we have it on tape. It was not much.
Well, then then I misspoke. And actually, this is the question that I was going to ask him, so maybe we'll have to go another round. My question was going to be, why is he knowingly lying about my record on this issue? His mail piece that came out about the parking meter deal says that I was a partner at the law firm when it did the deal. First of all, backing up, the problem with the parking meter deal was that Mayor Daley and the city council, again, a rubber stamp, go along along city council made the decision to sell those meters out from underneath all of you. Once that decision was made, a law firm had to bid on the project and do the deal, represent the city in negotiations with the meter company. That happened to be my law firm, where I worked as a mid-level associate at the time in a different department in a law firm full of about 600 people. Didn't know that we did that deal until after it went bad, about 2 years later, when it was reported in the newspaper that it was my former law firm that drafted the contract. You know, I'm going to take an extra second on this one. And so the allegation that I ever earned a single dime from that is patently and flatly false, and he knows it. The idea that I ever benefited from it or that the law firm benefited unfairly from it is patently false, and he knows it. Brian comes out of the school of thought that it is more get along, go along politicians. He will be the type of rubber stamper who will continue along the same path.
All right, I think there's an implicit question there. Are you a rubber stamp, get along, go around guy who blatantly has misrepresented her record, sir?
No.
Yes.
She was a partner at the law firm when the deal was done.
Oh,
The
it
law
was
firm
not.
made
It was 4 years before I made partner,
$600,000.
Brian. How dare you?
She worked at the law firm. She made $600,000. She continues to get money from the law firm. So
He's
that's
going to
those
stand
are
up
all
here and
facts.
lie to you on this stage. It's unbelievable. $600,000 from me?
The firm was paid $600,000, Alyx, and that's a fact.
Unbelievable.
I'm not lying about it.
You
And-
just said
and
I
you
made
said your
$600,000. I am
your
not
answer
my
the
law
last
firm,
time
Brian,
were
and you
asked
know
was
that.
Not much. So
Okay,
No.
you put it out
I'd
there.
say that's nothing.
But let me get back to the rubber
Please.
stamp question because again, clearly my course of action throughout my work as a volunteer in the community, I have been an independent community leader. The people that I've worked with on the various boards of the organizations that I've been a part of have not once in all the years that I've been doing this accused me of any type of conflict of interest, have suggested that I acted in a way that was because I was told to do so by one of the people that I worked for. I've been an independent leader throughout. I will continue to be an independent leader as your next second ward alderman.
Okay, I think that's a good spot to end this on. Nothing like a nice, quiet debate. We're going to move to closing statements, folks. They each get 2 minutes. We're going to do it. Ms. Pattison, you had the first word of this debate, so we'll give Mr. Hopkins the last word. So you go first for purposes of closing statements.
Oh, I thought I did the opening. You still want me to go first? Yes. Okay. All right. So the first thing I want to say, since this is the final debate, is a very heartfelt thank you to all of the residents of the Second Ward. You have been so gracious and so kind to me for these last months campaigning, whether it's inviting me into your home to talk to your neighbors or inviting me into your living room with your neighbors who you invited, or writing a neighbor-to-neighbor letter for me, or standing on a freezing cold corner in front of a grocery store talking to me about your city and its future. I have a tremendous amount of respect for all of you, and those of you who run great neighborhood organizations. I see some of you in the audience. Thank you. To serve you and be your alderman would be really the highest privilege and honor. That's another thing I should thank you for. For those of you who gave me your vote in the first go-around, so thankful for it and so privileged to have had your support. I want this job. Despite people telling you other things, I absolutely want this job. I see so many ways to improve our neighborhoods, and I would look forward to and relish every day the opportunity to get up and work with each and every one of you, whether it's fixing potholes, whether it's working on bringing fantastic community events to something like Pulaski Park, the actual park, and the neighborhood, and reducing crime in our neighborhoods, or working with you to navigate how to develop a community and set a policy for its future. I can't imagine a better job and a better way to wake up and a better thing to do every day. My experience as a lawyer, my experience as a congressional aide, my experience on the local school council, all of those things have given me a diversity and a wealth of experience and knowledge that I bring to the table to serve you. And I can't wait to do it. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you all so much for being a part of this fantastic ride. It's been a privilege and an honor, and I'm so grateful to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir.
Oh, yeah. I will end this debate on a high note by agreeing with my opponent that this should be a moment of gratitude. I started this journey over 2 years ago as well, and to wake up on the morning of February 25th, having known that I finished first place in an election was just a poignant and precious moment that I'll never forget. The system that we have means I finished first place and won an election but didn't get elected, which is why we're here in the runoff. But I'm so grateful to every person who voted for me in the first round. It was an honor to talk to you. Like my opponent, I've been knocking on doors in all of the communities, 11 neighborhoods or 13 neighborhoods, depending on how you count them. I've been in all of them. I've been invited into living rooms. I've had conversations on sidewalks and in parks. I've listened carefully, and I am completely prepared for the job of alderman. It's not enough to want the job. Both my opponent and I want the job. You've got to be prepared. And if you look at my experience, if you look at my years of service in government, everything I've done throughout the course of my life, all my dedication to the neighborhoods that I've lived in, and there's 2 Chicago neighborhoods that I call home. As a child, I was on a street called Winchester. It wasn't the Winchester in this neighborhood, it was South Winchester, but the neighborhoods are very similar. Chicago has been a part of my life for my entire life. This is my home. I want nothing more than to play a role in improving our neighborhood, improving our community, making our schools better, making our parks better, making our neighborhoods a place that we feel safe in, that we're proud to call home, that we love to live in. This is what drives me. This is what I want this job for, and I'm humbly asking for your vote so I can finish in first place again on April 7th. Thank you very much.
We're out of time for tonight, but you've been a good audience. Thank you. I'm sure both of these folks would be happy to stick around for a few minutes and answer questions if you have them. In the meantime, just remember the real prize here is that whoever wins gets to sit next to Proco Joe for 4 years.
Delightful.